The DeLuca mansion was the kind of place where even silence felt expensive. Marble floors stretched from one golden hallway to another. Crystal chandeliers glowed above staircases, wide enough for royalty. Armed guards stood at every entrance, still as statues, their eyes trained on shadows no normal person would ever notice. And in the middle of that cold, perfect world walked Rosa Bennett, the new nanny. She was 27, plus size, soft-faced, and carrying a suitcase with a broken wheel that squeaked loudly with every step.
Squeak, squeak, squeak.
Every maid turned to look. One guard smirked. Another whispered something under his breath. Rosa felt heat rush into her cheeks, but she kept walking. She had spent her whole life hearing people laugh quietly when they thought she would not notice. She noticed. She always noticed. At the top of the staircase stood Mrs. Bellini, the estate manager, dressed in a black suit with silver hair pinned into a severe bun.
"You're late," she said.
Rosa glanced at the giant clock. "Only 4 minutes, ma'am. The taxi." "Excuses are not useful in this house." Rosa immediately nodded. "I understand." Mrs. Bellini's eyes traveled over her simple blue dress, worn cardigan, and old suitcase. "This is not a normal household. You are here for one reason only, to care for Sofia DeLuca." Rosa softened at the name. "How old is she?" 6. A pause. "She does not speak much." Rosa looked up. "Why?" Mrs. Bellini's expression tightened. "Her mother died 2 years ago." The words settled heavily between them. Then Mrs. Bellini continued walking. "Do not enter the West Wing. Do not speak to guests. Do not ask about Mr. DeLuca's business. Do not take photos. Do not touch anything that does not belong to you." Rosa nodded after every rule. And most importantly, Mrs. Bellini stopped outside a white bedroom door. "Do not disturb Alessandro DeLuca." Rosa knew the name. Everyone in New York knew the name. To newspapers, Alessandro DeLuca was a billionaire shipping magnate. To politicians, he was a generous donor. To the streets, he was the king of the underworld. A man feared by criminals and respected by judges who should have arrested him. Rosa swallowed. "I won't disturb him." Mrs. Bellini pushed the door open. Inside was a child's dream room. Pink curtains, shelves full of books, dolls arranged perfectly, a small piano by the window, and toys so expensive they looked untouched. Because they were untouched. A tiny girl sat under the piano, hugging a stuffed rabbit. Her blonde hair covered half her face. Mrs. Bellini sighed. "Sophia, this is Miss Bennett." The child did not move. Rosa slowly lowered herself to the floor. Not too close. Just close enough. "Hi, Sophia." No answer. Rosa smiled gently. "I like your rabbit." The little girl's fingers tightened around the toy. "His name is Prince." Rosa gasped softly. "Well, forgive me. I didn't realize I was in royal company." For the first time, Sophia peeked up. Rosa placed a hand over her heart and bowed dramatically from the floor. "Your Highness, Prince Rabbit, I am honored." Sophia stared at her. Then, very quietly, she giggled. Mrs. Bellini froze. It was such a small sound. Barely there. But it changed the room. Rosa smiled. She did not know that downstairs, in the hallway, Alessandro DeLuca had stopped walking. He had heard it. His daughter's laugh. A sound he had not heard in months. He stood in the shadows outside the room, dressed in a black tailored suit, his sharp face unreadable. 2 of his men waited behind him, silent. Inside, Rosa began pretending that Prince Rabbit was giving royal orders. Sophia giggled again. Alessandro did not enter. He simply watched. And for the first time in a long time, the mansion did not feel completely dead. Later that evening, Rosa tried to help the kitchen staff prepare Sophia's dinner. That was her first mistake. A chef handed her a small tray with soup, bread, and sliced fruit. "Careful," he said. "I'm always careful," Rosa replied. Then she turned, bumped into a chair, panicked, saved the soup, dropped the bread, caught the fruit plate, and knocked over a silver spoon. The kitchen went silent. Then one young maid laughed. Another joined. Rosa stood frozen, holding the tray like it was a bomb. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'll clean it." The chef shook his head. Maybe just stay with the child. The words were not cruel, but the laughter was. Rosa knelt to pick up the bread, blinking quickly so no one would see the tears building in her eyes. I noticed. Rosa groaned dramatically. Please don't remind me. I've already embarrassed myself at least 10 times. He looked directly at her. You make a habit of being hard on yourself. His words caught her off guard. She looked away. I've had practice. The answer lingered in the quiet kitchen. Alessandro didn't ask another question, but something told him. Behind that simple sentence was a lifetime of pain. Just then, the old jazz song ended. The kitchen became silent once again. Neither of them noticed. From the security monitor inside the control room, someone had just watched the entire conversation. The next morning, the De Luca estate looked exactly the same. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway. Guards stood at every entrance. Business executives waited inside the conference room. On the surface, nothing had changed. But Alessandro De Luca knew something was different. For the first time in years, he had spent the entire night thinking about someone other than business, or revenge, or war. His thoughts kept returning to one image. A curvy nanny, barefoot, laughing while dancing alone in his kitchen. He found himself smiling, then immediately frowned. What is happening to me? Downstairs, Rosa was helping little Sophia make pancakes. The kitchen looked like a battlefield. Flour covered the counter. Eggshells were everywhere. Chocolate chips rolled across the floor. Sophia giggled as she accidentally dropped another spoon. I'm making a mess. Rosa laughed. Then we're making a mess together. The little girl smiled wider than she had in months. At that exact moment, Alessandro walked into the kitchen.
He stopped.
Every surface looked covered in flour. Rosa had a streak of white flour across her cheek. Sophia's tiny nose was completely white. The chef looked ready to faint. I'm sorry, Mr. De Luca, the chef quickly said. I'll clean everything. Before anyone could say another word, Sophia held up a badly shaped pancake. Daddy, I made this for you. The pancake looked terrible, burned around the edges, half raw in the middle. Everyone expected Alessandro to politely refuse. Instead, he took one bite. It's delicious. Sophia gasped happily. I knew it. Rosa smiled quietly. She knew he was lying, but it was a beautiful lie, one that made his daughter happy. Later that afternoon, Alessandro stood inside his office reviewing contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Marco entered carrying another folder. You've signed the wrong page. Alessandro looked down. For the first time in years, he had made a mistake. Marco raised an eyebrow. You're distracted. I'm not. You've read the same paragraph 4 times. Silence. Marco slowly smiled. It's the nanny. Alessandro looked up sharply. It isn't. Marco laughed. Sir, I've worked beside you for 15 years. I know exactly what you look like when something is on your mind. Alessandro remained silent. Marco placed another file on the desk. You watched her dance. Alessandro's eyes narrowed. You saw the security cameras. Silence filled the office. Marco continued. I've never seen you smile at anyone. Alessandro quietly stood and walked toward the large window overlooking the gardens. Below, Rosa chased Sophia through the flowers. The little girl laughed so loudly birds flew from the trees. Marco followed his gaze. You love watching them. Alessandro answered without thinking. I love watching her smile. The words escaped before he realized what he had admitted. Marco said nothing. He didn't need to. The truth had finally spoken for itself. Outside, Rosa sat beneath a large oak tree reading Sophia a fairy tale. And the princess discovered. She stopped. Sophia had fallen asleep against her shoulder. Rosa smiled softly. She carefully brushed a strand of blonde hair away from the child's face. You deserve to be happy. She whispered the words so quietly that she thought nobody heard them. But someone had. Alessandro stood only a few feet away, hidden behind another tree. He had come outside looking for his daughter. Instead, he found something he hadn't expected. Rosa gently kissed Sophia's forehead. Not because anyone was watching, because it felt natural. because she already loved the little girl. At that moment, Alessandro understood why his daughter smiled again. Rosa wasn't pretending to care. She truly did. That evening, a black luxury car stopped outside the mansion. A tall blonde woman stepped out. Designer heels, diamond earrings, a black silk dress worth thousands of dollars. Bianca Romano, the woman every newspaper believed would become Mrs. DeLuca. She walked confidently inside, until she heard laughter, real laughter, coming from the living room. She frowned. Inside, Rosa sat on the floor helping Sofia build a castle out of colorful blocks. Alessandro sat beside them, not working, not on his phone, simply watching his daughter laugh. Bianca froze. She had spent 3 years trying to make Alessandro smile. This nanny had done it in 3 days. Jealousy burned inside her chest. She forced a smile. Alessandro. He looked up. I wasn't expecting visitors. Bianca kissed his cheek. I thought I'd surprise you. Then her eyes landed on Rosa. And who is she? Before Alessandro could answer, little Sofia smiled proudly. This is Rosa. She's my favorite person. Bianca's smile disappeared. She slowly looked back at Alessandro, then at Rosa. Something dangerous flashed across her face. She understood immediately. This woman wasn't just another nanny anymore. She was becoming part of the family. And Bianca silently made herself a promise. No matter what it cost, Rosa Bennett would never stay in this mansion long enough to steal Alessandro De Luca's heart. Bianca Romano smiled. But it wasn't a smile of happiness. It was the kind of smile people wore when they had already decided to destroy someone. She looked at Rosa from across the living room. Simple blue dress. Loose cardigan. Hair slightly messy after spending the afternoon playing with Sofia. Nothing about Rosa looked glamorous. Nothing about her belonged in a billionaire's mansion. Yet, Alessandro couldn't take his eyes off her. Bianca noticed. And she hated it. That night, Bianca found Alessandro alone in his office. She closed the door behind her. So, he continued reading a file. So, the nanny. What about her? Bianca crossed her arms. You've changed.
No.
You smile now. Silence. You eat dinner with Sofia. Silence. You leave work early. Still silence. Finally, Alessandro looked up. What are you trying to say? Bianca took one step closer. Send her away. The room became completely quiet. Alessandro slowly placed the file on his desk.
No.
Bianca blinked. What? I said no. She's just a nanny. Alessandro stood.
No.
She's the reason my daughter laughs again. Bianca's expression hardened. And if she leaves, Sofia loses the only person who's brought light back into this house. For the first time, Bianca realized she had already lost. Not to another billionaire. Not to another model. Not to another celebrity. She had lost to an ordinary woman with a beautiful heart. The following afternoon, Rosa took Sofia into the gardens. The little girl chased butterflies while Rosa sat on a wooden bench smiling. The weather was perfect. Warm sunlight, gentle breeze, birds singing from the trees. Everything felt peaceful. Too peaceful. Outside the estate gates, a black SUV slowly stopped. 2 men climbed out. Dark suits. Dark sunglasses. Neither belonged there. One guard immediately noticed. Sir. Marco looked through his binoculars. His expression changed. Those aren't visitors. He pressed his radio. Lock every entrance. Inside the gardens, Sofia laughed as she picked tiny white flowers. Look, Rosa. They're pretty. They're beautiful. At that exact moment, one of the intruders climbed over the garden wall. His hand disappeared beneath his jacket. A pistol. Silenced. He quietly aimed toward Rosa. Inside the mansion, Alessandro was walking toward the conference room. Then, his phone rang. Marco's voice came through. Boss. We have intruders. Where? The gardens. Alessandro didn't ask another question.
He ran.
Outside, the assassin slowly squeezed the trigger. Before he could fire, get down. Alessandro's voice thundered across the gardens. Rosa instinctively grabbed Sophia and pulled her to the ground. The shot missed. The bullet shattered the marble fountain behind them. Guards rushed in from every direction. The second assassin tried to escape. Marco tackled him before he reached the wall. Within seconds, both men were surrounded. The attack was over. Rosa's entire body trembled. She held Sophia tightly against her chest. The little girl cried into Rosa's shoulder. "I'm scared." "It's okay." Rosa gently stroked her hair. "I'm here." Then, strong arms wrapped around both of them. Alessandro. He had never looked frightened before. Now, his face had lost all color. He looked at Rosa. "Are you hurt?" She slowly shook her head.
No.
He checked her hands, her shoulders, her face. Only after he was certain she wasn't injured did he finally breathe again. Without thinking, he pulled her into a tight embrace. Right there, in front of every guard, every servant, every employee. Nobody had ever seen Alessandro de Luca hug anyone, especially not like this. Rosa stood completely still. She could feel his heart racing. He wasn't holding her because he felt responsible. He was holding her because the thought of losing her had terrified him. That evening, the mansion finally became quiet again. Sophia had fallen asleep while holding Rosa's hand. Alessandro stood alone in the kitchen. The same old radio, the same marble floor. A few minutes later, Rosa quietly walked in. Neither of them spoke. Then, she reached for the old radio. Soft jazz music filled the room. She smiled. "I guess this room likes music." Alessandro looked at her.
No.
"It likes you." Rosa laughed softly. "You keep saying surprising things. They're true." Silence. Then Alessandro slowly walked toward her. "I've spent years surrounded by people who admired my money, my power, my name." He stopped only inches away. "But you never cared about any of that." Rosa looked into his eyes. "I cared about Sophia. I know. And somehow, you made me start living again too." Tears filled Rosa's eyes. She whispered, "I thought nobody would ever really see me." Alessandro gently reached for her hand. "I saw you the night you danced. You thought nobody was watching. But I was. You were trying to impress anyone. You were simply being yourself. And that was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen." A tear rolled down Rosa's cheek. She smiled through it. "So, are you watching tonight too?" Alessandro smiled. "I was hoping you'd ask." Rosa laughed. She placed one hand in his. The music continued playing. Slowly, they began to dance. No grand ballroom. No expensive gala. No photographers. Just a quiet kitchen, filled with warm light. Halfway through the song, Rosa accidentally stepped on his foot. She gasped. "Oh no. I'm sorry." Alessandro looked down. And he laughed. A real laugh. The first genuine laugh anyone inside the mansion had heard in years. Rosa laughed too. Soon, both of them couldn't stop laughing. From the hallway, little Sophia peeked around the corner, holding Prince Rabbit. She smiled, then whispered to herself, "Daddy finally found someone who dances like Mommy." She quietly closed the door again, leaving them alone. The music continued. The kitchen glowed warmly beneath the midnight lights. And for the first time since losing his wife, Alessandro de Luca realized something. The strongest people aren't always the loudest. Sometimes, they're the ones who dance alone in an empty kitchen, believing no one is watching. Alessandro stood alone in the kitchen. The same old radio, the same marble floor. A few minutes later, Rosa quietly walked in. Neither of them spoke. Then, she reached for the old radio. Soft jazz music filled the room. She smiled. "I guess this room likes music." Alessandro looked at her.
No.
"It likes you." Rosa laughed softly. "You keep saying surprising things. They're true." Silence. Then Alessandro slowly walked toward her. "I've spent years surrounded by people who admired my money, my power, my name." He stopped only inches away. "But you never cared about any of that." Rosa looked into his eyes. I cared about Sophia. I know. And somehow, you made me start living again too. Tears filled Rosa's eyes. She whispered, I thought nobody would ever really see me. Alessandro gently reached for her hand. I saw you. The night you danced. You thought nobody was watching. But I was. You were trying to impress anyone. You were simply being yourself. And that was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. A tear rolled down Rosa's cheek. She smiled through it. So, are you watching tonight too? Alessandro smiled. I was hoping you'd ask. Rosa laughed. She placed one hand in his. The music continued playing. Slowly, they began to dance. No grand ballroom. No expensive gala. No photographers. Just a quiet kitchen, filled with warm light. Halfway through the song, Rosa accidentally stepped on his foot. She gasped. Oh no. I'm sorry. Alessandro looked down.
And
he laughed. A real laugh. The first genuine laugh anyone inside the mansion had heard in years. Rosa laughed too. Soon, both of them couldn't stop laughing. From the hallway, little Sophia peeked around the corner, holding Prince Rabbit. She smiled, then whispered to herself, Daddy finally found someone who dances like Mommy. She quietly closed the door again, leaving them alone. The music continued. The kitchen glowed warmly beneath the midnight lights. And for the first time, since losing his wife, Alessandro De Luca realized something. The strongest people aren't always the loudest. Sometimes, they're the ones who dance alone in an empty kitchen, believing no one is watching.